The first time Halloween was celebrated in Japan was in 1997, and since then it has become the biggest event in the whole country. But even though the Japanese people love it, the government is trying everything they can to stop people from celebrating it. In this video, I even went to the middle of Tokyo to see how the Japanese government put thousands of police officers on the street to try and stop people from celebrating Halloween. But why, you may ask? Well, let's dive into it. For the longest time, there was no room in the Japanese calendar for a scary seasonal event like Halloween, since Japan already had Obon. Obon is a festival where Japanese people honor the spirits of their ancestors, who are considered to return from the afterlife during the month of August. This is why Japanese ghost stories usually take place in the summer, and historically, the scary time of the year in Japan has been summer. In the year 1997 though, Disneyland Japan held a Halloween event which was a huge hit, and year after year since then it only grew bigger, and eventually other theme parks and places started to have their own Halloween events to try and imitate the success Disneyland had. Japan being the homeland of cosplay, it's easy to understand why the people quickly fell in love with the idea of having an event where you can and are encouraged to dress up in a costume. Because of this, it did not take long for Halloween to turn into the biggest event of the year. But when things change fast, they can be hard to keep in control. Since going to Disneyland to celebrate Halloween obviously cost money, those people who wanted to celebrate but did not want to spend the ticket price had to find other venues to have their fun. One of these venues was Japan's most famous train line, the Yamanote line, which circles around Tokyo, thus is one of the busiest and most important train lines in Japan. Now you might have heard that trains are almost considered sacred places in Japan, meaning you're not supposed to drink in them, talk in them, or in general disturb anyone around you at all. So why would Japanese suddenly start celebrating Halloween in trains? Well, it wasn't actually Japanese who were the ones attending this party. The Halloween train idea started in English language communities online, where people would send email invitations and write blog posts inviting other foreigners to join.
How did you find out about the Yamanote Halloween train?
From my fabulous friend the fairy.
Alright, how did you find out about the Yamanote Halloween train?
I don't know, someone sent me an email.
Which is why, as you can see, most of the people celebrating it were foreigners who lived in Japan and tourists. By this time, Halloween still wasn't mainstream in Japan, so you can imagine how the locals felt getting on the train after a long day of work, to find themselves in the middle of drunk, noisy Gaijin. Year after year this Gaijin train only got more popular and rowdier, which is why eventually Japanese protesters arrived on the scene with pretty funny signs. And eventually the police stepped in and stopped the whole thing from happening. Now this was only the beginning of police stepping in to stop people from celebrating Halloween in Japan, and in this case I kinda have to agree with them. Even if Japan didn't have this culture where you have to be respectful to your surroundings in a train, I still wouldn't support people partying in there. It is already annoying enough to ride the train in Tokyo with no room to breathe and people grabbing your junk, that I don't really want any more disturbances in the trains for myself or for others. Soon after, the foreigners moved to another famous tourist attraction area in the middle of Tokyo, the Shibuya crossing. Eventually, even the locals started joining in, and just in a couple of years, Halloween in Shibuya became the biggest event in Japan. Hundreds of thousands of people started to gather in the Shibuya crossing, wearing costumes, drinking, and having a good time. It quickly became so big that the usual answer to the question, "Are you going to Shibuya on Halloween?" quickly became, "No way!" And that's because there were just so many people, you could not do anything. Even simply moving around started to be near impossible in the crowd. After the party had moved to Shibuya, everything seemed alright. The government let people have their fun, and for a decade, Shibuya was allowed to be the center of Halloween celebrations. But then, things suddenly changed, and the Japanese government put thousands of police officers on the street to stop people from celebrating.
Shibuya Ward enacted an ordinance to ban drinking on the streets and in parks during the Halloween period. It also started asking convenience stores and other retailers to refrain from selling alcohol.
Now, why would they suddenly change their mind like this? Well, let's find out. I went to Shibuya myself to see what was going on, and for the occasion I even decided to dress up as a virgin loser gaijin. The place was a chaos, and the atmosphere wasn't too fun. This was mostly because every street seemed to be blocked and every corner had a police officer shouting to a megaphone that Shibuya was off limits. It was really hard to film anything, since the second I stopped to shoot something, an officer immediately came to push me and told me to keep on walking. What used to be an event to have fun and see cool costumes now resembled a political protest where the tensions were high. Now, I understand the police were just doing their jobs and they had to be aggressive to control the crowd, but it still left a sour taste in my mouth. Things have turned this way for a couple of reasons. First, there was the pandemic, where, in order to avoid the spread, the government of Japan pledged citizens to stay home and promoted alternative ways to celebrate Halloween, like the virtual reality Shibuya party.
バーチャルハロウィーンでは新しい学校のリーダーズのバーチャルライブをはじめ30組を超えるアーティストや人気声優、VTuber が出演します。
Japanese government once again encouraged people to stay away from Shibuya in 2022 after what happened in South Korea, where sadly hundreds of people lost their lives during a Halloween event where people were crushed due to overcrowding in the small alleys of Itaewon. Considering how crowded Shibuya has been in Halloween historically, I do think it's a real concern that something like what had happened in South Korea could potentially also happen in Japan, which is why I understand the government's concern. At the same time though, them ditching the promotion of alternative ways to enjoy Halloween and not trying to ensure the safety of the Shibuya area, they've instead decided to rule with an iron fist and use aggressive militaristic tactics to keep people away. And I don't think that's the right way to go with this. People will always find a way around the rules, as they have in this case, and the party has actually moved to the much tighter and dangerous side alleys of Shibuya, instead of the easily controlled center. Even though most of the partygoers these days are Japanese, it still seems like in the eyes of the government, Halloween is still the same rowdy Yamanote line Gaijin train that it used to be years ago that was already banned once. With foreigners still being quite stigmatized in Japan, I don't see the Japanese government embracing this Gaijin event and trying to make it safe and fun for everyone, but instead becoming more and more aggressive with their tactics. Who knows what will happen to Halloween in Japan from now on, but if I had to guess, no matter how hard the government tries, it is here to stay.